Tak, dobré odpoledne, dámy a pánové. Já vás tady opět vítám po prázdninách. Je to vlastně první čtvrtek, kdy se tu zase s tím, jak se rozjíždí škola, scházíme a mám velkou radost, že se nám podařilo přilákat na půdu CEVRO Institute našeho dnešního hosta, slavný peruánský ekonom Hernando de Soto. Já myslím, neumím si představit možná lepší kick-off. Máme svým způsobem štěstí, protože přes víkend tu máme naši výroční konferenci s britskými konzervativci a s celou tou skupinou evropských konzervativců a reformistů, kde zítra bude náš dnešní host mluvit také, takže je to taky trochu díky Danielu Hananovi a dalším, že se s námi pan de Soto může podělit. Já to představení nechám tady dneska povolenějšímu našemu rektorovi Josefu Šímovi, protože je to jeho letitý obdivovatel a konec konců všichni jsme si kupovali někdy před 10 lety tu knížku Mysterium kapitálu. Já tady jsem si, zapomněl jsem si jít k tomu mikrofonu. Nicméně, než se dostaneme k tomu, tak ještě dvě organizační záležitosti. Dovoluji si vás zároveň tímto pozvat na další dva podvečery, které tu máme domluveny. Jednak příští týden, to nesouvisí s těmi čtvrtky, ale rozhodli jsme se udělat takové diskuzní fórum Média a politika, což souvisí s tou velmi aktuální diskuzí o politických vlivech skrze vlastnictví médií u nás. Takže příští středu 21. září v 17 hodin za moderování Tomáše Pojara se tu k tomuto tématu budou vyjadřovat lidé, kteří nepochybně k tomu mají co říct. Dalibor Balšínek, šéfredaktor Echa, Jaroslav Plesl, Mladá fronta dnes, že? Tak to budeme obzvlášť zvědaví, a Jindřich Šídlo, Seznam.cz. Čili to je první pozvání a druhé pozvání je pak již na říjen 13.10. zase už v rámci těch našich občasných čtvrtků. Tu od 17 hodin budeme mít, tentokrát trošku vybočíme z toho našeho tradičního schématu, kdy s Blízkým východem se bavíme o těch různých hrozbách a půjdeme trochu do minulosti. Přijede sem Eli Carmon z IDC Herzliya, který je historikem a zabývá se vlastně tou dlouhodobou studiem té staré interakce mezi bolševiky a s blízkovýchodními teroristy, takže společně s Pavlem Žáčkem, který zkoumal české archivy, a tak tu Eli Carmon, který dlouhodobě studoval ty blízkovýchodní archivy, se budou bavit o tom, jak komunisté podporovali blízkovýchodní teroristy. Čili 13.10. je další večer před námi. A já vítám vás tady a nyní poprosím pana rektora Šímu, aby uvedl našeho dnešního hosta. Díky, že jste přišli.
Dobré odpoledne, dámy a pánové. Je mi velkou ctí tady být, protože náš dnešní řečník je opravdu mým velkým favoritem. Já pracuji i se svými studenty, takže čteme jeho díla, sledujeme jeho vystoupení, takže je to opravdu mimořádná událost. Zároveň toto dnešní setkání může být nejenom kick-off, co se týče nové sezóny akcí našeho Centra transatlantických vztahů, ale my teď na vysoké škole CEVRO Institute zahajujeme nový v angličtině akreditovaný a pro mezinárodní studenty otevřený program PPE, Philosophy, Politics, Economics, jako první vzdělávací instituce v České republice a přesně v tomto rozměru o filozofii, politice a ekonomii tady budeme se bavit i dnes. Nyní mi dovolte, abych představení našeho řečníka přednesl v angličtině. Hernando de Soto was born in Peru, educated in Switzerland, and serves as the president of the Institute for Liberty and Democracy, located in Lima, Peru. And put simply, is one of the most influential thinkers in the world. His ideas are known to all, including the most powerful policymakers. Bill Clinton, for example, called him the world's greatest living economist. Those of you who, for whatever reason, do not particularly appreciate Bill Clinton, you might want to know that, for example, Ronald Reagan had only words of praise for Hernando de Soto and his work too. And Kofi Annan, United Nations Secretary as well, and Rand Paul or Jeb Bush, whom we had here at CEVRO Institute a couple of months ago as well. Hernando de Soto has debated his views with leading world scholars, including Nobel Prize winners such as Joseph Stiglitz, he was here in Prague, by the way, Jeffrey Sachs, Jagdish Bhagwati, or Paul Collier, or debated business icons such as Bill Gates. And indeed, there are some who saw how influential his ideas are, hated that, and took action. A terrorist attack by the Shining Path guerrilla movement was launched against de Soto's Institute for Liberty and Democracy in Lima. And indeed, his first book from the late 80s, The Other Path, was exactly about alternatives faced not only by the people of Peru. Hernando de Soto is not only a man who meets presidents and gives nice speeches, but actually he helped millions of poor people, not only in his home country, but around the world, and not only helped them to get richer, the recipe being given in his second and utterly influential book, The Mystery of Capital, and practically applied in many countries around the globe, but also live much safer lives, as his ideas helped ultimately to undermine the Shining Path, and the same might hopefully be replicated elsewhere. See his concept of capitalist cure for terrorism, which he has been written recently and he will talk about today. His ideas have enormous influence and significantly contribute to our better understanding of the role of private property, markets, and freedom. It is also worth mentioning that Hernando de Soto is active in fighting an intellectual battle against those influential thinkers and ideologues whose work undermines the market and property-based system of the West. De Soto's recent article from The Independent, Why Thomas Piketty is Wrong About Capital in the 21st Century, challenges conclusions of one of the most popular and perhaps most dangerous books of today, which, however, as many of you know, ranks as number one on the list of the most unread books in history, as people want to have it in order to signal their anti-capitalist views, but are not able to finish it. Hernando de Soto got through the whole book and knows exactly why is that book so wrong. Also, there is a most interesting link between Hernando de Soto's property rights argument and modern blockchain technology, which is the technology behind the Bitcoin digital currency. By the way, Bitcoin can be used to pay tuition fees here at our school. So we might soon hear about another originally unexpected impact his work might have once the technology gets fully developed. Hernando de Soto received many prizes, such as the Templeton Freedom Prize, honorary doctorates, for example, from the University of Buckingham, which is CEVRO Institute's partner school in Great Britain, and many other awards appreciating his innovative thoughts and practical impact affecting the whole world. It is a great honor to have such a distinguished speaker who is not afraid to talk about the triumph of capitalism and its implications here at the CEVRO Institute. I would also like to thank Dr. Vondra for hosting and moderating this event as a part of his Prague Centre for Transatlantic Relations lecture series. And indeed, I thank you all in the audience for coming here. Now please help me in welcoming Hernando de Soto. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for coming to this lecture, and thank you very much for your kind words, Mr. Vondra. I will start off, as I was asked to, by talking about our work regarding the Arab Spring, and then maybe move into blockchain if there is enough time. Regarding time, don't forget I'm a Latin American, so you have to stop me before I get to Fidel Castro type length. Right, this is something we started off about 5 years ago, when the Arab Spring began in Tunisia. The news, I broke something. Okay? It's okay. As long as somebody can change it, thank you. Thank you. In Tunisia, it was the 17th of December, that Mohamed Bouazizi, in the fair city of Sidi Bouzid, Tunisia, self-immolates. You may remember that that's when the Arab Spring begins. He self-immolates. Accordingly to many, it's because his cart was full of fruit and vegetables. He was slapped by a policewoman, dignity. He sets himself on fire. The Tunisian president says it's a pity. He dies in January, but people go to the streets. And so the message was, why do people go to the streets? I mean, the Middle East is a place where people generally don't go to the streets. And where was the symbolic power? Where was the signal that set people going to the streets and toppled in 2 months for governments? So that intrigued us. It intrigued us also because we like to look at the informal economy in our part of Latin America, and we thought we recognized enough of a message to do the investigation. So we put together 2 teams, one person in connection to our Egyptian base we had another 2 persons, and 2 persons, one who shows French and one who knew a little bit about merchants, to go to Sidi Bouzid. And this illustration here, infograph, illustrates a little bit what we found out. The first thing that we found out in about 2 to 3 years going back and forth there and ending up forming a team of some 10 people was that Mohamed Bouazizi in the first 2 months did not self-immolate alone. He self-immolated with 63 other people. So it's a message that spread. 63 other people in every North African and Middle Eastern country. And we found this by simply going to the papers, and nobody, of course, is very proud about having a country where people commit suicide, so it was hard to find it. We then went and traced these people over a year. They didn't want to talk. Who wants to talk about the fact that they tried to commit suicide in public, self-immolating? And we were able to interview half of them because they survived. They were extinguished with blankets. And what we did, and it's on public broadcasting system in the United States, comes out 3 times a night. The interviews with them where they tell you what motivated them. Well, the first thing that was interesting was that they were all entrepreneurs. There wasn't one religious cry. There was nobody that was religious present. And there wasn't one political cry. The 2 cries that came out as we also looked at the recordings that people who had gone to their suicides were registering. So it's not only what they told us, it's also what they announced in public was 1, expropriation. I have been expropriated. It's intolerable. I cannot build a business, literally. Bouazizi told his brother in Sfaz, Salem Bouazizi, that the reason he was going to make a statement, they didn't know he was going to commit suicide, was because the poor also had the right to buy and sell. And the second statement they used was a word that's very much used in North Africa, especially in Algeria, called hogara, which is something about disdain, about being left behind. Those are the 2 things that came across. When we then started trying to find out with numbers, with the Tunisians, with the Algerians, with the Egyptians, with different governments that let us in to look at the numbers, basically those entrepreneurs who work outside the law, not only in the bazaar, in the Kasbahs, are roughly about 70% of the population. That's a lot of people. If you look at the numbers of the International Labor Organization, which we did when we have published 36 articles challenging Piketty to a debate that he has not accepted, even though it's come out in the front page of French newspapers, it is saying your statistics are just not current. They're Eurocentric. So the statistics, for example, in the Middle East are, because Europeans, I understand, since you've already had your industrial revolution and we haven't had ours, you talk about the entrepreneurial class and the proletariat. But if I take the numbers of the International Labor Organization on Tunisia and Egypt, and then I go and do a survey and try and find out what their salaries are, only 30% of them live on salaries. 70% live on profits. So we are the way you were, or at least the way the United States was about 150 years ago. In one of the most inspiring things I ever saw that sort of led you along those lines was when looking at a speech that was given by Abraham Lincoln in 1860 when he addresses the State of the Union just before the United States begins the Civil War. He responds to the attacks of those in the south of the United States, the forming Confederacy, which says that north of Virginia and south of Virginia, these are 2 different people. We're not of the same country. They say, you up north are capitalists. And we've seen what happens to capitalists. I forget who was the author on the south of the message, but he said, I've seen it. It leads to miserable lives, which it sometimes does, by the way. Competition is a pretty terrible thing. And we've seen drunks in Boston and hopeless people in New York in the streets next to the garbage. While we in the South have a different way of arranging things. We treat our slaves well. We treat them to be good Christians, to sing songs. We clothe them. We feed them. We take care of them. You are not a careful society. Now, Abraham Lincoln at that time had held which I didn't know at that moment, a long correspondence with Karl Marx, 1860. He was very popular then. And after corresponding with Karl Marx, he then, the State of the Union speech, says something I would say for most developing countries that I have gone to, which is, you're wrong, he tells the South. We're neither capitalist and we're neither really simply an agrarian society. We're a mixture of both. Most Americans do a little bit of business on one side and work for somebody else some of the time. And that's what we are, as opposed to these Europeans. And we'll see where we get. That, I think, is a little bit of our story. Our story is that if you go any part of the developing world, everybody is trying to get into business. But it's very hard to get into business because they tell you, here you can make a company. And you make a company, a collective. But it has special characteristics, like in the Middle East, like in Latin America, and many parts in in Asia. One, it has no limited liability, which is something you Europeans created. Limited liability means a legal article that tells you, I am willing to risk up to $5,000 of my assets to go into business. So you know what you're up to. You know your risk. And the other person also knows what's at stake. And so you know that if you lose in business, you lose $5,000. Well, in the third world and the former Soviet Union, where I come from, and we are 90% of human beings, we have no limited liability. When we go into business, it's a big poker game. Win all, take all. That's rough. We have no right in our companies to issue a share of the company, because a share means that you have property. And you have property that you can cut up into little pieces. So I give you 10%, I give you 10%, I stay with 80%. And therefore I can share the adventure. There is no way, because we have no property rights, that in those companies you can actually take a piece of paper, divide it into 100 pieces, and piece it out. So you can't raise capital. You can't either go out and make a guarantee against credit. How are you going to guarantee against credit? You need a piece of paper that says that you can transfer the rights to this. You don't transfer a house, you transfer the right to a piece of the house. You also, therefore, cannot bring anybody to work with you because you live with your family. And you might be a nice guy, but maybe somebody doesn't like your father-in-law or doesn't like your mother, which is what happened to Bouazizi, who wants to integrate a family. I mean, I'm delighted to go work for Skoda, but do I have to integrate the family is another story. So capitalism is made out of a series of legal structures that allow people to bring together interests and explore and try and find out how and what you can invent with somebody who's not your drunk brother or who doesn't believe in the same things you do. It allows you to make other families, business families, cold objectives, but it allows you to associate in different ways of people from different races, religions, and cultures. If you don't have any of that, you are what we call the informal economy, or the kind of people that Abraham Lincoln was talking about, that you will see in any Clint Eastwood film, right? I go out, I shoot somebody for a little bit of money, then I work for my wife, then I work for the office boss, then I come back. You're flexible until the system gets organized. So to our figuring, this is what's happening in great part of the Middle East. You have a lot of these people, whom all of you who visit there are in business, like they're in business in Mexico, like they're in business in Peru, like they're in business in Phnom Penh, but the structures of the system are not yet in place. And we cheat because we say to Europeans and we say to North Americans, but we are in business. But no, we don't have the same companies. We are in business, no, but we cannot capitalize our goods. Let me give you another example. When you go, for example, to a mine in Peru. We've got a lot of mines in Peru, gold. That's why my ancestors came from Spain and Italy to get the gold. It's still there, and the price has gone up, and it doesn't matter if it's gone down again. It'll go up. It's worth a lot more than it was 20 years ago. Now, when you go in there, you then negotiate with government, who has the property over the subsoil where the gold is, or the oil, or the gas, or the uranium. But you don't own the topsoil. The topsoil is owned by communities. So you go to the community, indigenous communities. We've got 7,500 of them in Peru. And these indigenous communities, you say, you own it, I'd like to buy it. And then they say, yes, that's what the law says. But in reality, we're already split up into little individuals. But the law says that we're a community. And if I ever try and destroy that community, I will get hundreds of thousands of North Americans coming in and saying, you remind me of General Custer. You destroyed Chief Sitting Bull. You destroyed the Sioux. You destroyed the Apaches. Well, that's their problem. We didn't. But we still preserve the idea of indigenous associations. So the miner says, well, what do we do? Because it's going to be good for the country. We get the gold out, get the taxes in, and you can find your people. So they say, look, what you're going to do is you are going to buy from them individually, illegally. But we have very good lawyers in Peru, and we'll make sure it doesn't look illegal. The important thing is that you want a title that is stamped by the community that says you bought things legally. These two things will go into the bilateral investment treaty between Peru and the United States. We have a bilateral investment treaty with everybody, like every country does, and a free trade agreement. And all those people of confused property where it's neither here nor there, we pass through an organization called OPIC, Overseas Private Investment Corporation. And they will take those titles and convert it into one title that can go into the Securities Exchange Commission in the United States. And you will be able to raise against that certificate $6.5 billion for one gold mine in Cajamarca. All right. So with this piece of paper, I have managed to not recognize the property rights of Peruvian Indians, not ascertain that the community holds anything, but I have taken out of that piece of property right enough information to raise money. So property rights aren't just I own this. It's also I own little bits that do different little things in the world. Sophisticated. Then Janet Yellen, who heads the Federal Reserve, the Fed, they call it, the Central Reserve Bank of the United States, doesn't know about this. $6.5 billion is peanuts to my friends, the Americans. Peanuts. But she's got statistics. And the statistics say that the market requires $6.5 billion of liquidity. So she issues $60.5 billion. Today, before it was done automatically, today it's called quantitative easing. So, out they go. $6.5 billion in US dollars instead of Peruvian soles. Who gets richer? Who gets richer? These Americans not only own the mine, they own the added value, which is called capital, which Marx would have got just like that. He would have said, that's surplus value, they're extracting it from you. But Marx is dead. And the good things he had to say are no longer alive. But the fact of the matter is, if you do not give our Indians property, you're going to end up them being like Apaches, drunk and out on the street. So, that's the Middle East. Now, America's a very cultivated people, and Europeans are cultivated people. And they're fascinated with Islam. So what they do is you look back to Islam and say, it's a problem. It's a problem between Islam and Christianity. Is it? When Muhammad Bouazizi committed suicide, he had Nike's slippers on, white socks, blue jeans, a white t-shirt, and a basketball shirt, jacket. Look at the pictures. The Industrial Revolution has come to the Third World, And the guys that are rising are poor, and they do not have clever institutes like yours or mine to defend them, because they're poor. Because they can't say a thing. All they know is they want to make a living, and they're embarrassed. And if they go to the foreign organizations, they've got the International Labor Organization that says, look, sorry fellas, but the world is divided into three categories: labor, capitalists, and government, and you're neither, so we're going to place you in labor. Eurocentric, not good enough. It's not going to allow you to fit the categories. By the way, I'm being provocative to make this interesting. It's not going to allow you to pick up the categories that allow you to get solutions. I mean, the whole idea of categories is to get solutions. So we think that this is going on in a lot of the world. It's happening in a lot of the world. And what we try and do in my organization, it's a small organization, is simply say that categories are very important. Categories are very important, that the 19th century of North America is very helpful in understanding where we are. That many international organizations don't help you necessarily do that. Now, can I have the next? I think I broke everything here, so maybe the... Ah, okay. Now, yeah, that doesn't mean I know how to do it, but we'll start. Ah, there we go. Here's Sidi Bouzid. 38,000 inhabitants. When we try to find out why and who was after Mohamed Bouazizi, we know that it was in district number 9 of Sidi Bouzid. We still don't know what was going on. There must have been a personal story. Fight over a woman? Fight over some land? We don't know. What we do know is 9th district was against him. And so when they went against him, at that district, what they did is they took all the rights away from him. So let me go back. What the newspaper said was that they took away his cart. We reconstituted his cart. We took it where it was, ready to go to a museum, and we filled it up with the vegetables so that everybody said, yes, that was that. We compared it to the newspaper articles. We took again his electric balance, and we couldn't get more than $225. Who commits suicide for $225 when he had various of them? What we discovered is that they took away, with that slap, it was the last straw, they took away the certificate to his house, which he was turning into a title, which he was using to go and buy an Isuzu truck, right down there. They took away his right to associate with people that were not of his family, so that he could constitute a company that bought directly from the orchards and put it into the market. They took away his right to limited liability. They took away everything I just told you about. Now, if they do that in the New York, United States, because this happens everywhere, and it's a policeman who doesn't like you, and he's against you. Remember that film with Charlie Chaplin where the policeman takes an apple away from him and eats it? Well, what you do is you go to another fellow and say, look, Del Carpio doesn't like me. I'm going to trade my place with the other guy's place. And we switch. And therefore Del Carpio, people are what people are. He hates me. We go to another district. He can't. Because he's got no property right to trade. It's untradeable. You see, when you own something, it's paper that allows you to trade it. So the result is, after a while, that each of these guys was put out of business. Now, they're not lawyers and they're not economists. So they don't understand what's happening. All they know is that life has no sense anymore as they understand it and see it, and as they see you Europeans coming in as wealthy tourists, some Latin Americans too, as wealthy tourists, and they just can't make it. That's a little bit what's in there. When I interviewed the second man who self-immolated, who was also from Tunisia, all this is in film, after about 3 interviews, I asked him, we started getting along. I said, do you mind if I ask a personal question? And stop me if I'm wrong. He said, no, okay, let's talk about religion. Your religion says that you shouldn't really commit suicide. He said, forget that. That's nothing. That's not the essence of my religion. The essence of my religion is you shall not steal. You shall honor your contracts. You shall honor government. But you, Mr. De Soto, will never understand that because your prophet was a Christian. Christ, and he threw the merchants out of the temple, while my prophet is a merchant. So you'll never understand it, and you Westerners will never understand what's going on. So let's go back now to Tunisia. Blockchain. Now, to my mind, if I have to trace the history of the Industrial Revolution in the United Kingdom or in the United States as I look north from the south and I start seeing the first glimmerings of rising entrepreneurship, the gold rush in the United States, the taking over of Texas by all these guys with dead animals on their heads, Daniel Boone, David Crocker, really primitive guys, chasing away sophisticated Mexicans and Peruvians like myself. How long is it going to take before you democratize capitalism? 200 years? So here's a seal. In Sidi Bouzid is where the information is as to who owns what. And it's going to be there for the next 100 and 150 years. Because from what I have been able to see, the law, once the top lawyers and jurists and diplomats and politicians of any country agree on the rule of law, before it actually hits the bottom, especially if you're underdeveloped, will take 100 years or more. Or if you're lucky, not so lucky, but if you go into a war like the Japanese, Meiji Restoration to the Second World War, 70 years. 70 years and you need a war because you got to shake up the system. You have to get it invaded. So how can you get the information of what's going in there to up there? So we got invited by some guys of Silicon Valley who had read us, who said, have you started exploring blockchain? And we said, what is blockchain? They said, it's the software that's underneath Bitcoin. I said, Bitcoin. It's an artificial currency, right? And, well, you've written about capital and that capital travels in symbols, so you should be able to understand it. Any ideas? So we spent the last year and a half studying blockchain. It's very difficult. Why is it difficult? Because my guys are mainly lawyers. To fight lawyers that are ultra-conservative, not to conserve Benjamin Franklin, but to conserve Francisco Pizarro or Hernán Cortés, really conservative guys. You need lawyers too. It takes a diamond to cut a diamond. Now, what we then did is we started saying, okay, these are the principles of laws that all nations have abided by since the Second World War. Everything we're talking about is in the IMF treaties and the Bretton Woods Agreement, it's all there. But in our countries at the top, like it is in North Africa, it hasn't reached the bottom. So it's obvious that the legal chain is a slow-moving staircase. And Bitcoin is a fast-moving information system. So what's the challenge? The challenge is, how do you get legal concepts into two digitals? Because these Silicon Valley guys only speak in 1 and 0. They're about as, the alphabet at least has got 24 words. And grammar can allow you to bring 24 letters, and grammar can allow you to put in lots of words. These guys build on 2. How do you fit the law into 2 things? Well, that's what we've been working on. So what we know now is that everywhere in the world, everything's written up. The West is one. Literally, every place in the world has got a record-keeping system. It's just not standard. Now, what happens if you bring that into one center of information and you can start comparing? What happens if you tell Mohammed Bouazizi, according to your law, inside district number 9, you got the right to nothing, but according to your government, you got the right to everything. Boom, connected. At the same time, in one screen. Because that's the challenge. Information technology doesn't work in beautiful patios. It works on a flat screen. It's rectangular. It's a prison. How do you get in there? So that's what we're doing with blockchain. We're trying to have the law, what you Europeans created over time as rights to freedom, etc., put into digits. So that you can quickly scan a contract and say, whoop, you're in, you're out. And even if your government doesn't want to reform, I can tell you that you need 3 things and you introduce it into a smart contract. And then you publish the ledger, not in the cloud, which is what blockchain does. Internet does, right? Puts it into the cloud. Nobody looks at the cloud. You introduce it into Sidi Bouzid. Bang. Why? Because people care about their reputation. So much law in Europe, you think that it's the law that obliges people. No, it's reputation. If you're a Peruvian and I cheat on a North American, I don't care. But if you tell me I'm a cheater where my wife lives and my cousin lives, I really care. So the advantage about information is you can place it in many parts at the same time. So that's one of the things that we'll be talking about. And how do I know you can get those documents in there? And with this I end. Is that these are the documents that Sidi Bouzid were taken away from him. The whole world is documented. From Tanzania to Tunisia. And the United Nations is going to take 300 years to get it into New York. But with blockchain and with some smart Europeans, we might be able to bring it down to the rest of the world, not in New York, but in Sidi Bouzid, Arequipa, Tanganyika, Egypt, and we'll be a much better place. Thank you.
Thank you very, very, very much. So, that was not Fidel Castro, it was just lightly 30 minutes, so... Raul. So that gives about 40 minutes or even a bit more for a discussion, so I don't see any hand up yet, at least. So think about your intervention. So maybe I would open the floor with a following question. In the last 4 years, if you observe the discourse about the post-Arab Spring aftermath, the dominating feeling is skepticism. So it makes me, with the AECR conferences, the last year we have invited another economist from Switzerland. His name is Benedict Köhler, and he published a book, Early Islam and the Birth of Capitalism, and he argued that the mission of the Muslim world is just to commemorate that Prophet Muhammad has started as an entrepreneur, and in fact this early entrepreneurship in the Muslim world has been a very liberal, and the general problem is that it's totally forgotten in the world. But the issue is like to wake up this kind of hidden talent or whatever. That's my first question. The second question is very practical. So With all your teaching recommendation in the, let's say, last 4 or 5 years, have you been approached by some Middle Eastern government or to help them in the real terms?
Thank you. Yes. I have been approached, not only approached, I've actually signed contracts with the heads of state of various Middle Eastern countries, the purpose of which is to design a system that will allow them to take those pieces of paper I showed you rapidly into the market. How you find them, how you can do this. We've done this with millions of people throughout the world. But the world has got billions, not millions. I mean, we have, for example, brought into the formal economy in Peru 15 million people in less than 10 years. But 15 million people in less than 10 years is 1/6 of 1% of the world population. So the question is, manually you can do it, but it'll take time. The idea is, how do you put this into information technology? How do you put into information technology also, and how do you do it in such a way that the developed countries will fund it or will approve of it? Because if you are part of the European North American group, it's one thing, but if you're south, the influence, the power of the big powers is crucial. I mean, if the European Parliament decides that you're a bad guy, and the United States Congress does too, you're in serious trouble in my part of the world. So you not only have to indicate that what you're doing is not that you're going to expropriate in the name of something, because, you know, every title that Mohammed Bouazizi had, you know, probably belonged to somebody 300 years ago who's going to rise and say, that's mine. And so there's a moment where you got to cut off. There's a moment where you have to come and say, history ends here, and if somebody else has a right, we're going to compensate for it, but I'm not going to kick out 10 million people from here because one family wants to stay with something else. You can't, because you're in a type of transition. So the way that we help these governments is to do two things. Is, first of all, how to inwards understand their own people and understand that the people that they themselves say, that's the bazaar. Uncultivated, negotiating little schemers that will cheat you on a rug easily to, but they're 70% of your population. You better have to learn to live with poor people who at the beginning will do everything outside the law to get ahead. They got to put bread on the table. So you've got to find a way of organizing that, bringing the rules in, and not try and impose rules that you brought from the outside. It involves also saying the following thing. The rule-making system of any developing country is really terrible. Let me tell you about my country. And I'm going to talk about my country more than other countries because I like to concentrate my enemies in one geographical spot and avoid spreading it around. My country produces 100 laws a day, 106 to be exact. That's 30,000 a year. That's where people with influence put in the rules. All right? Now, most of them come from the executive branch. The legislative branch makes a lot. So you not only have to spread titles around, you have to come to the issue of rules, because I can give you a title to anything, but I put 3 good rules, I'll take it back the next year. So it has a lot to do with democracy. It has a lot to do with transparency. It has a lot to do with people in control of what's right and what's wrong. And so with these governments, we do that so that they can then, at the right moment, tell Western nations, I'm going to make a change. And it might involve some of your interests, but I got to do what you did to make people come in. And how do you negotiate that? How do you negotiate what was happening in the 18th and 19th century in North America, with the 21st century foreign policy specialists of the North today. That's strategy. So we consider that that's a very important thing to do. Regarding these governments, we were called in by literally just about all types of government during the Middle East. And then first of all, Muslim Brotherhood came in and took over some governments. We've been called on by them too. And of course, I don't know the interiorities and the horrors that happened, you know, with civil war and religious wars. But in many of them, I mean, the leadership, like for example in Egypt, we're all in business. The head, the supreme guide of the Muslim Brotherhood, owned $3.1 billion made from jail on information technology. All the head command was business. So there was a point, if you want to, of understanding somewhere. So it is important, you see, that even after that, we've been called in by President Sisi, and I've just signed a memorandum of understanding. Because basically there is an agreement that 70% is going to be a troublemaker until you attend them. There's a perception. So most of the things we know are, as a matter of fact, the result not of studying them academically, but of getting contracts to find out where are the steps that you have to do to change the law and have it, and for it to be accommodating to poor people who have already taken a great part of the territory. Now we learned that, of course, from Peru. We laid a lot part of the Peru because when we fought the Shining Path terrorists in Peru, and we did the whole strategy, we found out that essentially they got their popularity from defending the assets of the poor. That's their role. Like the role with ISIS. They go in and they defend those who are the majority. So if you're going to fight them, you have to take away the protection role. Or they're going to go towards someplace else, and the other ones are going to come and say all of this is due to the fact that you're looking forward and looking west, you should look into the past. What you have to indicate is that they have assets and they can be protected and that government will in fact do it. So yes, the reply is we have worked with them. We are still working with some of them. We do help them to do plans, their long-term plans. And at the end they will go through, some are going through, but some will go through only when you also need great political leaders. You need the political leaders, as you know in the Czech Republic, that can bring the message over at the right time, at the right place, because it still needs a leadership. So, sorry, I've been a little bit long in that reply, but just filling up time.
Just maybe another question. You mentioned the ISIS, the Islamic State, and what should be done with regards to the poor people there. Just from this perspective, 10 years long American engagement, or more than 10 years long American engagement in Iraq. From the perspective of economy, should they do something better in the past?
Oh, sure.
And what went wrong?
I had before told you that my policy was to keep my enemies as small as possible in poor little countries. No, they obviously made a big mistake. They made a big mistake. They made a huge mistake. And it's rather interesting because I know a little bit of the inside stories, you know, but they changed leadership along the way. Don Rumsfeld was leading the invasion. Right? You've been Minister of Defense. Then he won, right? All over. Then Condoleezza Rice took over. And Bremer came in from the Kissinger Institute. And they changed roles. So there's a lot of... It's not only we third worlders who make mistakes on the way. They also made mistakes. So the issue here is, it was a good idea, the idea of getting away a dictator and instituting a democratic place so that you could show in a Middle Eastern country that their culture was perfectly compatible with democracy. That's basically not a bad idea. The question is, I'm not too sure you can do that from abroad. You know, I'm not too sure that you can always be liberated from abroad. Or if you are liberated from abroad, you got to go in and you got to go out very quickly. I'm trying to think, you know, in the case of Peru, when we had a dictatorship, and we had a long dictatorship, if the Brazilians would have come in and liberated us, they probably would have been welcome 15 days. Then, out. The guys with the uniforms, with the blue eyes, taking away our girls, driving 4x4s, I don't like it, get them out. So, a long overstay. In other words, your strategy, look at, for example, what the Americans did that was brilliant. That was absolutely brilliant. When President Roosevelt, then Truman, trusted General MacArthur, and I'm sorry I don't have the pictures now, but it's very good, because I had to study it, because we had a Japanese president in Peru whom I had to convince for about our reform, so I had to go all the way to Japan. When he's trusted with the war, he sets up in 1942, not well known in the United States, you're not going to find it in many history books, if at all, in Honolulu, in Hawaii, a mission led by a man called Wolf Ladijinski, who was from the State Department. And the idea is, okay, in about 3-4 years' time, we should win the war against Japan. Now, how do we win the peace? How does it all start? And this man, Wolf Ladijinski, like MacArthur, were Jeffersonians. That's it. So the question is property. So MacArthur, who had before been governor of the Philippines, said, study the property issue. And what they discovered was that somewhere at the beginning of the 20th century, the first 5-10 years of the 20th century, there had been 57 huge revolutions in Japan against the established power by farmers, violent ones. And that the military industrial establishment, feudal establishment of Japan said the way we're going to organize this is with an explanation and with war. The explanation, this is Wolf Ladijinski speaking, the explanation is that Japan is not big enough for everybody. They took away our lands in China, in Korea, in Formosa. Let's get them back. Then we're going to have space and we can spread it out. And if we declare war on them, we can take our farmers, put them under uniform, discipline them, and control the revolution. So the idea was, once they were inside, they would win the war against Japan, they would entrust the Japanese to then spread private property in Japan. That was the general idea. And they did. And just as Mao Zedong was beginning to really win in China, they said, we're going to plant 3 thorns on the side of China. Japan, the former colony of Japan, Formosa, which is today Taiwan, and Korea. And these 3 will become prosperous and will bring down China and convert it to capitalism. That was MacArthur. And it actually won. They absolutely and totally, they brought in the informal economy. You can see the posters. There's thousands of posters where they explain what this means for you at this time is that you're now going to be a property owner, and they did it all through the Japanese government. So it's not that they didn't know how to do it. It's just that that part of U.S. history has not been recognized. So what would have happened, coming back to your question, if in Iraq, the first thing they had done was saying, all right, all this oil that is taken over by Saddam Hussein, it's going to be yours. The system is the following one. All this land is going to be yours. So you're not going to come in from the countryside and take over Baghdad. You're going to stay where you are. I'm going to give you something to do. It probably would have been a very different place. That, of course, does not mean you have the right to invade Iraq. That's another story. But the reply to all of that is that if we go back in history and we find out how the West, wherever it was able to conquer territory, it was when it appealed to everybody. I mean, it's basic politics when you get the majority on your side.
Okay, so please, let's see. You please introduce yourself and then.
Yeah. Ivo Kaplan, Union of European Federalists. If you allow me, when we came from Middle East to Japan, to go around to Europe, because and there was statements of Minister of Foreign Affairs of Germany and France in last days of June that Brexit violates or disrupted even the Westphal Treaty. The Westphal Treaty from 1648. Because practically from that time, and according to the Westphal Treaty, all these big powers, France, Germany, Russia, Britain, and maybe some others, this Austrian monarchy where you are today, will decide together what will be in the future. And because of Brexit, which was some solution, practically not fully legal, because it will become maybe legal sometimes, but we only speak about Brexit, but it's some virtual reality still. But if the British government will make it reality, then it is breaking of these rights on which Europe is standing from that Westphalia Treaty 1648. So what do you think about that, and how you can say about the future when you said, if I have understood well, that good Tunisian future or good North Africa future in the Europe view could be in some 300 years or at least 100 years. Thank you.
From a different corner. This is good. This is good. Well, first of all, let me tell you, my angle has a prejudice. Of course, I look at this as a Latin American, and I look for lessons for Latin America and, if possible, for the Third World, which is where I move. So I have a prejudice, and I have not lived the European thing as well as I should have. But here's my angle on it. What I remember from my schooling, one of the things I liked most about reading about history was a little book called A Geographic History of Europe from the Congress of Vienna until Modernity. And the lesson I got from that is, boy, these Europeans are very unstable people. So you had to start off with Austria-Hungary this size. They go, just continue with Germany, made up into 42 states, and then 1871 it comes across. Then it splits into two. Then it splits back. Then you form Yugoslavia. Then you undo Yugoslavia. And, you know, if you put a moving picture, it's like a Charlie Chaplin film. The Soviet Union, holy smokes, disappears in our lifetime. So when I talk to this with my Peruvian colleagues, I say, very unstable, these Europeans. Well, at least we, since 1822, have pretty much kept stable borders, just on the fringes. Now, here's a side that I think is interesting, but of course, I'm looking at it from my point of view. If you take Alsace-Lorraine, that was always fought between the French and the Germans, of course it went from one side to another side, but Herr Schmidt and Monsieur Dupont are still living in the same place. So what that actually, I think, tells us is that sovereignty is pretty unstable, and people change their minds. If they're British or if we're English, these roughneck Scottish, or the enlightened Scottish say these English don't really know how to think the way we do. And these Irish say they don't have our emotions. The Europeans go back and forth all the time. But property is relatively stable.
Thank you.
Dan Šťastný, University of New York in Prague. I have two short questions that will require probably short answers as well. The first one is about blockchain. This is not the first time I see somebody being very optimistic about it. But I wonder to what extent are you really sure that the technology will be transformative when it comes to property rights? Because I assume the lack of property rights is not really a consequence of, it's no coincidence. I assume there's a certain degree of the situation being designed. There's somebody not interested, potentially the government's probably not interested in property rights being upheld. So I understand the blockchain will increase many things when it comes to transfers of property rights and transparency of it. But if there is some sort of force against it, it might not really be as transformative. And the second thing is, given the fact that you seem to paint the picture that suggests that the causes of terrorism are largely, if not exclusively, economic. That is, if there were property rights and people were doing better, that would essentially do away with terrorism. So again, the question is, is it really, it's not going to be 100%, but is it the major factor when it comes to terrorism? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, regarding the first question, I think the role that blockchain will play, and it might not be blockchain, you know, somebody can come up with another adaptation quickly, but the idea of getting the information across is that it will make obvious that there are maps, like the ones of Sidi Bouzid, all over the world. There are maps that detail who is where, but they're not in standard language. And the lack of the information that the world has westernized to the point that assets have been already distributed according to local consensuses should have a transformative effect even on leaders. I mean, politicians need to be elected or need to be favorable, even if they're dictatorships. You have to keep the majority on your side. So my idea there is that this will inform. And it will inform in a manner that people like to be informed, which is digitally. If all of a sudden this thing can travel and you can pick it up for $400 or so per tribe, and you find out that in your tribe of Navajos, the same thing is happening as in the Kamloops in Canada, and that assets have got frontiers which are agreed according to local consensuses, it's going to have a very invigorating effect. Does that mean that everybody will want it that way? No. I mean, my class of people in Peru, the guys of the upper classes, I'm part of the upper classes, it's easy to be part of the upper classes, there's so many lower classes, is essentially the fact that we're cultural brokers. You want our gold? Talk to me. I know how to talk to both sides. I can talk in English, I can talk in French, and I can talk to the local guys. So obviously some of us are going to be displaced, and we're going to resist. So you're absolutely right. I just think that a better informed world, that it's not only religious, that the religious pull comes at the end, but that at the beginning it's security, it's hunger, it's prestige, it's being beat up like Bouazizi is in front of his family, and that all of a sudden you can stop that through law, without violence, is going to make the world a better place. But it doesn't deny the other factors. I just think that it's the unknown factor. To what point I'm right, we don't know. And that, of course, replies to terrorism. Okay, in the case of terrorism, I don't write about it. I set up the strategy to beat the Shining Path. And before setting up the strategy to beat the Shining Path, I went to Vietnam. Because we have in our valleys coca, from which cocaine is made. And in Vietnam, it was the Amapola, from which opium is made, and the Bekaa Valley between Syria and Lebanon, because that's where guerrillas begin. You see, you have this amount of stuff, you have to grow it in a faraway space, which is a valley, and then you have to bring it out for European and American noses across large territories. And therefore, you have to corrupt your way through the territory. And when you corrupt your way through the territory, you've got to protect the people who are in the racket, in the business. So I've seen that property has a lot to do with not only taking away one of the incentives for thugs to come in, which is protecting that way, but also for finding thugs. We put one person in the New York Police Department for a year to find out, on the basis of what one of my young colleagues told me when I brought him to the United States the first time, which is, he said, look at the amount of police we have in Peruvian streets, or Latin American streets, or Egyptian streets, and look at the amount the Americans have. Sometimes you don't see them. Where are they? And the reply is that they have a system called skip tracing, which is that whenever a crime is committed, they already know that at that time, there is nobody that generally commits a crime if he isn't familiar with the neighborhood. It's rarely happens. So if you know who lives within 4 blocks, you will catch your criminal within 3 months. Skipping and tracing addresses. And if you look at any American, do you have in Czechoslovakia this program called Miami Vice? Have you ever had it? Miami Vice? Okay, it's 2 American cops, good-looking fellas, that generally are looking for a Colombian or a Peruvian like myself, right? So it starts off minute 1, they see a beautiful blonde, and the beautiful blonde says, De Soto, what a rat. He left me. What?
Do you remember the music in the Miami Vice?
What was it?
It was done by the Czech jazzman living in the...
Fantastic. Another point of union. And so... There we go. So there they go off, and this blonde says, De Soto's gone to 353 Stewart Street. And then they go, and then a brunette comes out and says, he's a terrible guy. He's gone to 101 Drive. One address after another, you catch him. What do you do in a country without addresses? How do you find people? So I don't know how far this property thing goes, but it is one of the missing links.
Thank you.
Well, the microphone is there, so you are now, and then Charles.
Martin Panek, I wonder what your take is on Paul Romer and the Charter Cities idea, and do you support that? Are you optimistic about this project, or are you familiar even with it?
With what project, excuse me?
Paul Romer and the Charter Cities? You don't know. It's, I guess, too difficult to explain. Well, Paul Romer, you know Paul Romer, the economy.
Yes.
Ah, okay.
Free trading city.
Yeah.
Yes, well, it's an old strategy. The idea is you create a port-type situation, and you make the system work there, and it's example to everybody. I think that's good. I think that's good. I just think that all the bazaars of Europe are also these kind of cities. I mean, people may do business even in poor sectors, but I think it's whatever brings the argument across is a good idea. So no problem with that. What I do in a way is what we're doing in a way is very similar. It's simply indicating that people are already in business wherever you go. I mean, that's how people actually live, and that's the way they're being organized. But anything that helps bring across the idea that it is not alien to any culture is a very good idea, yes.
Charles Ross, European Anti-Corruption Center. Thank you, Sasha. Mr. De Soto, thank you very much for taking your time to come to Prague and to CEVRO to share your thoughts. One comment and question that I'd like to raise is, indeed, your deep drill OSINT approach to discovering what's really happening on the ground and, in fact, demonstrating that these are conditions that exist throughout the developing world, in emerging countries. One of the ancient problems, of course, is that the abuse of authority is almost an ancient art form. And yes, the need to foster good government, transparent government, through the use of blockchain or successor technologies is evident, bien sûr. But in your interviews offline with so many officials, I'd like to ask for your comments, please. While it is clear that offering the opportunity for property and a stable life to men and women around the world in their hometowns, in their countries, in their villages, is perhaps the ultimate opportunity for defeating terrorism, because people protect what they have and they protect their families with what they have. But the question is, how do we address, how do we motivate the vested interests in bureaucracies, in authoritarian governments throughout the world, where indeed maintenance of those vested interests is the maintenance of power and authority, irrespective of questions of democracy and freedom. Thank you.
Thank you. It's an excellent point. The question is, what can one do in one's lifetime? You know, of attacking such a big problem as is abuse of authority or lack of democracy or lack of equality of opportunity. So at the beginning, when I left business, like a lot of my colleagues, and started looking at what were the reasons for underdevelopment, we didn't begin with the economic thing, we began with the political thing. We started asking ourselves, where is the abuse of authority come in? So one of the first things we did at the beginning, which wasn't basically the first books we wrote, you know, not all of them were bestsellers, but there were some that were pretty good. It is comparing, for example, U.S. democracy to Latin American democracy. Okay, so it looks like we're similar, but we're very unsimilar. Not only culturally, we're very unsimilar. First of all, whenever you elect a congressman in the United States, you elect them by district. 38th District, New Jersey. We don't. Not anywhere in Latin America. We elect them by lists. So if you have President Garcia, President Toledo, President Maduro, President whoever, Peña Nieto, he comes and runs on a list. So when the guy who gets into Parliament, he owes his career then and in the future to the political leader, not to the people. Now we say that this is because of this reason and this other reason, but in fact we have created a political class where the line between legislation and executive powers has been completely erased. The executive power owns the legislative power. Your congressman, from what I know of you as congressman, I know especially some of the Californians and the guys who are off on the West Coast, they take a plane every weekend and they go and they visit their constituency, so automatically you get a feedback from the people. I mean, it's not complete, but at least you know what's going on. Our guys, once they're elected, don't go get feedback. They didn't even need the feedback to get elected. Every time you decide that you're going to create a law, you cannot just create a law in the United States. You have to go through a whole procedure called comment and notice periods, where it comes out in draft form, it's consulted, everybody comes in, and then if you're even in doubt, you've got what they call sunset laws, which is let's let it ride for a year or two, and if it doesn't work, we drop it. To find out if the law at the end is creating more benefits than it is creating restrictions or the other way around, you've got the Office of Management and Budget. And the Office of Management and Budget keeps track and is a complaints office where you can actually see if it's working. And they're political appointees because you don't trust your bureaucracies to always be on the side of the people. So you want to vote them in each time. As a matter of fact, if you look at your ministries in the United States, You've got the State Department, but you don't leave them alone. You put the National Security Council to fight them off on the other side. And the OMB fights off Treasury. You Americans don't trust anyone. That's the way it should be. So the question is, how much can you keep on writing about that the secret of democracy is in the details? It's in the fact that the people are always there at one moment. And if they don't, they will come and trumpet, or they will come and Sanders it, and demand that you adjust for the change at the grassroots. It's an uphill fight. It's an uphill fight. So the strategy is, if one expects to live till about the age of 96, which is when my mother died, you basically decide where you're going to hit. And my idea is, if for whatever reason you have not been able through politics, because the argument is much too refined to indicate that democracies are not the same all over the world, that the British don't have your system, for example, but they have surgery. The Swiss don't have your system, but they have Vernehmlassung. They've got referendums. They've got a variety of systems that keep the people in touch with government. The Japanese do too, et cetera, et cetera. We could name all developed countries have a system to be in touch. The question is, if at least regarding economic matters, you have created a parallel connection that allows you to jump over politicians' heads so that the public opinion is in touch, then you might be able to get to democracy. It's a strategy. It's an excellent question, yeah. The thing is, it's like I once heard somebody who was in a warship fighting in Japan, and then all these kamikazes were coming in. I was a little boy, and I saw this guy with a tattoo at the beach and said, "What did you do?" He said, "I shot these planes." I said, "Did you get anyone?" "I don't know. Just keep on shooting. Just keep on shooting."
Tak ještě máme chvíli. Já možná, protože všechny otázky byly v angličtině, můžete se samozřejmě zeptat i česky a tady máme interpretační zařízení, takže pokud se někdo styděl nebo nechtěl se zeptat anglicky, klidně nechť to udělá i česky, že jo? To jsme tady na to vybaveni, tak ještě nějakou pěknou otázku na závěr. Nebuďte tak líní. Nic? Výborně.
In Europe nowadays, Pavel Kramer, Institute for Alternative Education. I have the question that even in Europe now, there seems to be a deterioration in democracy, so that democracy actually becomes less. We have all sort of propaganda leaders getting stronger now, but I think there is no great change in property matters here. So what do you think is the cause of things getting worse in Europe in the last few years?
I don't follow Europe all that much, but I'm going to try and point you in a direction. I think you've got a lot of property problems. Not land property, but property over values, shares. In 2008, when there was a collapse of the subprime market in the United States, a Secretary of Treasury called Hank Paulson rose up and said, "We've got a problem." I didn't know what could be. He said, "Look, what is happening is that a lot of people have mortgaged their homes to be able to finance themselves or finance the purchase of their homes. And then over 16 sort of steps of generations, it has been transformed into different kinds of property paper that have finally reached Wall Street in the form of a product that we call derivatives." All right? So here you have, just like a mine in Peru, a subprime home made out of wood. These Americans are carpenters as opposed to us. We go for rocks. And here you've got the value of the property as a financial instrument. So he says what's happened is that these guys have found that it's not any more interesting to fund the home, and so they're dropping their property, they're selling it. But the rights to the property in form of financial instruments are being held by a lot of international banks. And if that happens, there will be a run on the banks because it's so immense, the amount of money that is deposited in derivatives, which are super mortgages, that there will be a run on the banks, and it'll be 1929 all over again. So I propose, says Hank Paulson, a Troubled Assets Relief Program called TARP, which consists of me going to the U.S. Congress. I remember he went in front of a Nancy Pelosi, put one knee on the ground, and said, "Give me $1 trillion. Because I need to go into Wall Street and take out the troubled assets, also called toxic assets, and take them out. And God's here. I can't reach him, but here's a U.S. presidency. I'm going to put him in there. And we will then, having taken that, take the risk. The most powerful government in the most powerful government in the world assumes the toxic assets, and we will see then how invalid they are, but at least we will not have a run." 2 weeks later, I forget where I was, Cairo, say. I was there, I turned on TV, and then this same man, Hank Paulson, says, "You know, we've decided that we're not going," I've talked to Gordon Brown, who was the Prime Minister of the UK, "we're not going to go in and make a surgical operation, which is to take these toxic assets and take them out, the cancer, and leave the people clean. No. We're going to use that money rather to fund the banks so that they are strong. And we're indicating, therefore, that either because we're positions on the board of directors, the banks are not going to fall. That's what we're going to do." All right. Now, at that time, I was consulting for reasons that have nothing to do with financial markets, which I know nothing or little about. I was consulting on developing countries, and I go really high up the top. And usually they ask me questions, but I asked a question. I said, "Why did you not go and take out the toxic assets and just simply take the cancer away without funding banks who are going to lobby you and make sure that nothing changes afterwards?" And the reply was, "It's because we couldn't find them." I talked to Chris Cox, who's an old friend of mine, who was the head of the Securities Exchange Commission. And I said, "How much derivatives are there on the market?" And he said, "At any one time, there's about $650 trillion of derivatives. The GNP of the United States, the gross national product, is $16 trillion, and derivatives are roughly $650 trillion. That's property. These are titles over values. And up until today, you Europeans and you Americans don't know where that is. If I go to any of the banks that I know in Europe and I ask, "Where's your balance sheet? How much derivatives have you got?" They'll say, "Here's my balance sheet." I'll say, "How about the bad bank balance sheet? The one that holds your derivatives?" "Ah, that doesn't count because we already settled that it doesn't have to be presented." Your balance sheets no longer reflect the way they did in 2008, who owns what. So you've got a property problem. Because if you don't know because there's various ways of holding property. I can hold the land, but I can also hold the debt to the land. And none of you guys know it. That's why you now have quantitative easing. Quantitative easing means political control over where money is going. You're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to let money come according to it. No. If you want to know how much money you're going to have next year, you better ask Janet Yellen. She will tell you in the newspapers, "I think there should be more quantity." "No, I think we're not going to do it." "No, we're going to raise interest." You have to actually sleep with her if you want to find out what's going to go on. You're in trouble. You may even be in more trouble than we are. You do have a property problem.
In fact, maybe, anybody has a question or? Oh, yeah. Please wait for the microphone.
Okay, that's not really just a question, that's more how to raise a point which at least I personally believe is of the utmost importance on this planet. And that's basically overpopulation. That we are hitting the limits on so many fronts. For example, you have mentioned Egypt. During the time of the pharaohs, and they were pretty much on the limit of environmental capacity. By the way, that is ecological term, carrying capacity of that habitat. There were like 1 million of people. Today, Egypt has 80 million. There is a dam on the Nile, Aswan, so it no longer floods the delta. And that region can produce even less food. Yes, of course, it imports a lot of wheat from outside. But in general, look at the Middle East. If I exaggerate it a bit, that's a desert, sometimes a piece of rock, with very little environmental carrying capacity. Yet, there are millions and millions of people. And it's like that, myself, I'm coming from biological background. And I can say that in many economical topics, discourses, there is sorely missing the very simple understanding. Looking at the petri dish with the media, with the agar, where bacteria are spreading, and they hit that limit. That's it. And now, I'm not saying that it's completely black and white, but clearly, look at the curve of population. Compare that to all the phenomena which we are now experiencing. So, what is your take on that? How this topic is manifested in your thoughts, in your plans and suggestions, including to some of the highest ranking people on this planet? So, thank you.
Can you interpret the question for me, please?
I don't know. Maybe, it's Egypt, overpopulation of Egypt, desert land, so how to compromise this with the property. Too many people, not so much property. Should you sell the desert, or I don't know whether it's my correct interpretation. I was trying to do my best, but...
If I can...
But please, can you...
if I can summarize that.
Simple no.
Environmental limits.
No,
carrying capacity of the ecosystem we are in.
Can you ask the question?
Question is, how do you incorporate in your suggestions the environmental limits of this planet?
Yeah, very good. Well, let me start off by an area I know a little bit better, like the Amazon. The Amazon starts in my country, Peru. Right? Now, one of the biggest problems, of course, we have is if the Amazon goes, the biggest lung in the world goes as well. Now, the question is, how do you identify where environmental damage exists? Because the biggest problem is how, you can go through a satellite and you can see the deterioration of the environment, right? If people are washing gold and they're using sulfuric acid or whatever it is that they're using, you can see the jungle literally deteriorating. So the problem isn't finding out where it's at. The problem is finding out who's accountable for that. Who's guilty? And the only way that I have found that you can do that is by awarding a degree of property rights over the areas and compensation for indicating who actually is responsible for the damage. Now, in the case of the Amazon, what you've got are the people who live in the Amazon, who are natives, Amazonian natives. Now, the way to do that, of course, is a property right, by the way, doesn't mean that they necessarily own it. A property right is like a bundle of sticks. You give them one right, or a second right, or third right. You give them the right to receive compensation for saying who is guilty. And you make sure that if you're doing, for example, carbon bonds, it doesn't go to the government, which has no way of understanding where people are. I mean, these are flimsy, bad, corrupt little governments. You give it to the native people so that they can tell you. So the idea about property is not, to my case, so much that you want to divide it among the people. It's that at least you document who is accountable for what, according to whatever social contract you have. So I would say the following thing, that if you actually are able to map out who is accountable for what, you will at least have the information with which you can then attend an environmental cause. So now let's go back to Egypt. Egypt has got, as you said, one long river, as opposed to we in the Amazon, who have the Amazon is just the result of many tributaries going into it over a very wide scale. And that is the only really agricultural land that they have. And the logical thing would be for them not to invade the land next to the river, to the Nile, but actually go where the rocky parts are and leave the agricultural part clean. But so far they don't really have a very clear idea of who is in that agricultural land. When we went in to do the studies, because the categorizations were different, they were non-environmental, we found that there was about 30 million people living on the agricultural land, which they didn't have a title to. So you know that they're there, but you don't know who runs what. And there's no army big enough in the world to handle 30 million squatting Egyptians. So what I'm saying about property is essentially the general idea. You have a government objective, you're sensitive to the environment, you want to protect what's green, well then find out who's already there, and on the basis of who's already there, make them not only have rights but have obligations. But you're never going to be able to do something about it until you actually know who's there. Let me tell you how bad this gets. In Europe, more or less, and take just 2 minutes for this, in Europe, more or less, you know who you have in your cities, and you know who you have wherever it is. When I met, as you were telling me before, at this meeting that President Havel had, I forget, it was 5 years ago or 6 years ago, where I debated my friend Joe Stiglitz, President Obasanjo of Nigeria was there. I had just visited him before he was president. And he had said, look, I want to do something about the issues of property and land in my country, and how much is that going to cost me? So I said, well, you know, I'm not in business, but it depends how big your country is. And coming here, I picked up a book I didn't know much about Nigeria, and your population is, I believe, 120 million. And he said, well, 120, 180, somewhere there. I hate to say it, but we don't know. We don't know. So the first thing, the way environment relates is, first of all, find out who's there, how strong they are, whether you can get them to report damage and compensate them for it, and then when you're informed, you can take a decision. Otherwise, you're fighting against the wind. That's my sort of feeling. In other words, I don't give you a solution. What I'm telling you is if you don't have a map that tells you where everybody is, you are not going to be able to solve nor terrorism, you're not going to be able to solve environment, you're not going to be able to do police work, you're not going to be able to distribute credit. You know, we live on the planet Earth. And we have Google Maps. It's wonderful, but they don't tell you who controls what. Google Maps just tell you where's the desert and where's the trees, but who's in control? Once you find that out, you get ISIS and you get the guys who are bringing down the green. Más o menos.
I think it's a nice conclusion. Thank you very, very much. I think it was a really nice conclusion, and Just once again, those who wants to come, we have two events. Next Wednesday is the media ownership and the influence on the politics, the debates among one of the Czech leading managers in the media world, and then on October 13, our regular Thursday series, a discussion between Pavel Žáček and Eli Carmon from Israel on the discovering possible interlink between the communism and terrorism in the past, based on the archives both from the Middle East and here in Prague. So once again, thank you very much for coming for this. Thank you very much for willing to share your views and opinion with us. We are deeply honored by your visit and will always be glad to welcome you again in future. Thank you.